pattern for this plushie can be found in my Etsy shop linked in the description below. Using the guides from the pattern and a marking tool, mark the placement for the face on the right side of one headpiece. Place the 2 felt eyes and the felt nose on the markings. Pin them in place. Then place the whiskers and pin them in place as well. Using a matching thread, edge stitch around each eye and the nose. You want to be on the edge of the felt but still catching it in the stitches. These are small pieces, so make sure you take your time for a nice look. Now repeat that with the whiskers, going down one side, sewing a couple stitches on the edge, and then flipping it around for the next side. Lay one headpiece on top of the other with right sides together. Pin it in place. Now we're going to take it to the sewing machine and we're going to sew all the way around the plushie using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. We're going to leave a 1 to 2 inch gap on the bottom side right about here. As you're feeding it through the machine, if you get to any spots where you need to pivot a bit, it's easiest to leave the needle in the sewing machine, pick up the presser foot, rotate the fabric, then put the presser foot back down and continue to sew. This will be most important around the ears. Now you want to clip into the seam allowance of the points right next to the ear. This will help give the plushie definition when you turn it right side out. Make sure you're not cutting through the stitches, only the fabric in the seam allowance. Now using your hand or a turning tool, you're going to turn the plushie right side out through that gap we left from sewing. When it's turned all the way right side out, you're going to reach back into the gap using a blunt tool. You can use a chopstick or the end of a pencil. I'm just using my turning tool. And you're going to push out all the curves from the inside of the plushie. This will especially be good to do on the ears. Now we're going to stuff the plushie with polyfill. How much polyfill you use will partly determine the shape that the plushie takes. You may need to smash it down and shove it into the curves a bit to help the plushie take the proper shape, because sometimes the polyfill has a mind of its own. When the plushie is stuffed to your liking, tuck the seam allowance from the gap inside the plushie. Take a needle and matching thread and hand sew the gap closed using a ladder stitch. If you're not familiar with a ladder stitch, you just start with one small stitch on one side of the fabric, then move directly across to the other side. You're just going to keep going back and forth from one side to the other, kind of like making rungs on a ladder. That's why it's called a ladder stitch. Tie a few knots on the end of the thread. After I have a couple of knots, I usually like to make an extra stitch and then tie just a couple more knots, just extra security. Then you're gonna stick the needle through the seam to the other side of the plushie, usually the back side. Then clip off the thread. This will ensure that the tail of the thread stays tucked in the plushie for even more secure finish. If the stuffing inside isn't taking the proper shape, squish it around and give it a little massage. That will help the polyfill kind of spread out into the fabric a little bit better and just take a better shape. Now at this point you can call it done and be finished with it. Or you can add the optional bow. If you're doing the optional bow, thread the needle with a matching thread through the center of the felt bow piece. You're going to pull it through and pull it tight until it scrunches all together. Wrap the thread around the bow 3 times to hold it in place. Then you're going to thread the needle through one end of the felt tab piece and pull it until it sits on top of the felt bow. Then you're going to wrap the tab around the center of the felt bow piece. If there's any excess tab, you're going to trim that off. Tack the tab to itself with a couple stitches on each side. Then either knot it off and get a new thread, or if you still have extra thread on here, you're just going to go ahead and stitch it straight onto the plushie. Pick your placement. It could be top or one of the sides. Find where you want it to sit and then just tack it on with a couple stitches and then knot it off and trim the excess thread. Then that's it. You're all done. Your plushie is ready to be played with, squished, and loved on. Thank you so much for following along on this pattern. If you enjoyed this pattern, please feel free to take a look at some of my others in my Etsy shop. The link is in the description. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.